Hey guys, Dr. Matt and
What's going on,
me.
guys?
I'm Nate, also Dr. Nate here. With Made to Move, we're going to talk about progression strategies and basically about progressing too fast versus too slow, and maybe some like general guidelines of how to kind of progress through endurance and strength training. Mostly strength training.
Yeah, so that's our bias.
Yeah, that's where we're at.
That's what we're good at.
So you wanna?
Yeah, so we see a lot of people coming into PT because they progress. Typically, most injuries comes down to like a load versus capacity. Like tissue capacity is how much your tissues can handle at a given time. Load is the amount of work you do in a given session or a given week, whatever it may be. But typically we see a lot of people coming in with pain when their volume ramps up too fast. So again, like we just want to talk about today is like the concept of building slowly over time, and that all of your training should not necessarily be a marathon, or sorry, it should be a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a very slow, progressive build each week. And for runners, there's some people that say anywhere from 10 to 20% a week, and then throwing in some tapers and deloads in there. So we'll kind of go over some strategies that we use to help address that.
Yeah, so first I kind of want to talk a little bit about this idea of chronic workload. So it's basically how much your body is used to doing. We've seen a lot of recent research that shows basically when you provide a large increase in acute workload, so like the work you do right now on top of that chronic workload is when injuries happen. So if like your workload's right around here and it's kind of up and down around this line here and you're used to that, your body's generally going to be okay there. It's when you go kind of up and down and then you spike up and back down, that's going to kind of be what creates those injuries. It's that load versus capacity issue Matt was just talking about. So the way you can kind of avoid that is using smart progression. So for a new lifter, that would be probably this idea of a linear progression. So find a moderately hard weight. So if you're back squatting, first time you back squatted, maybe that's 85 pounds for 5 reps. That was kind of tough, but you could complete it with good form. Every week, so long as you can complete all those reps, you're just gonna add 5 pounds to it. Just this straight up linear progression. If you start to feel pain, take a few weeks at that same weight before progressing again, but we're not spiking up. We're kind of doing this really gradual progression up to where we need to be. For endurance training, it should generally be probably around the same thing. So I've personally been adding a lot of endurance training into what I'm doing, and it seems like just so long as I progress by maybe 2 to 3 minutes of a run per week, and then every 4 to 5 weeks I kind of drop down just a little bit, increase my pace, and then do another like 2-minute increase every single week. That's going pretty well. I haven't injured myself, and like you'll see progress over time. It's just being patient with what you're doing.
Yeah. I'm going to go back off the strength model that you said of just that linear progression, especially if you're a novice, is you don't need to increase the number of sets you're doing per week, essentially, to continue to build strength, especially if you're new. You should pretty much just stay like anywhere from like 10 to 12 reps. So if you're doing, let's go back to back squats, 3 sets of 5 in the first week you're training. The next week, just stick with 3 sets of 5 and keep going up in weight. We don't need to add this huge increase in volume being a novice lifter. Most athletes, especially lifters, will benefit from just keeping that sets the same until you no longer can make progress with that amount of volume, and then you need more volume. It's better to get the most out of doing the least amount of work than it is to go ahead and set your standard of, ooh, I have to do 20 sets of like squats or 20 sets of leg work to make progress, because then you're in the gym for like an hour and a half and you're like, how am I going to progress from here? So start out slow and enjoy the newbie gains while you still have them, and just keep chipping along that way.
Yeah, and that's also where you run into trouble, because there are some tissues that don't adapt as quickly as your muscles do. So like maybe your muscles are getting huge, but like your tendons are going to take a little bit longer to adapt to that load. Your actual joints and connective tissue are going to take longer to adapt to that load. And if you just ramp up to like 20 sets of squats a week, that's going to be an issue if you're kind of that beginner lifter, or even if you're not a beginner lifter and you're going from like, you hit the end of those linear gains and you decide like, hey, I'm going to start a harder program. You go from like 10 sets of squats a week to 20 sets of squats per week. That's going to be that acute training increase, and that's what's going to get you. So you'd want to do like 10 sets of squats one week, like 11 or 12 sets of squats the next week, 13 or 14 sets of squats the next week, and do that slower progression up. And this is also when more experienced lifters run into trouble too. If you've had an injury or you take some time off, a big chunk of what you get out of training is your brain learning how to use your body. So your brain remembers how to try hard, it remembers how to use your muscles, but your tissues, if you've taken like 6 weeks off, have decreased their ability to tolerate that load just a little bit. And so as a more experienced lifter, if you come off after a big break and you try and jump right back into the same volume you were doing, that's going to be a much more likely point of injury for you. It's going to be, if your chronic workload at that point after 4 to 6 weeks of not doing something might be pretty low, kind of way down here, and then you try and jump back into your previous program, your brain's going to remember how to do it, and that actually allows you to get a much bigger spike of volume, and you're much more likely to injure yourself at that point than even maybe just a beginner lifter would be.
Yeah, and last thing we'll just talk about would just be deloads. So once you kind of get an accumulation of fatigue after a long training cycle. Let's say you've been doing 3 sets of 5 for a squat, and you've been doing that for 5 or 6 or 7 weeks, and you're starting to notice some fatigue, you're having a harder time falling asleep, your appetite's either suppressed or you actually are more hungry, and you just don't feel like you're fully recovered. Being a newer lifter, like, just take a deload week. Like, I feel like that's one thing that we just don't see a whole lot of in like the general population. We see it in endurance athletes, we see it in professional athletes who have like an in-season, off-season, and all those different phases, but we don't see that a whole lot in general population training. And I think it's extremely important to have some weeks where you let your body rest and recover, especially if you have other things going on. Like, it's a Christmas holiday, so we have a lot of family in town, or you just have a lot going on in life. And that you need to sometimes realize that training needs to take a backseat and just drop a little bit of volume. So for me, on a typical deload, like, I'll drop maybe 2 or 3 sets. Or let's just go back to the 3 sets of 5, make it simple. But you can either drop volume, you can drop it to 2 sets of 5 if you're really feeling beat up, or you could drop intensity. Let's say you've been doing 315 pounds for 3 sets of 5. It's pretty good. But then you could essentially drop that down to 275 for 3 sets of 5, still keeping the same volume, but adjusting the intensity based off how you feel, and then start slowly working your way back up to the weight you were doing. So it's good to have these kind of peaks and valleys of training, but scheduling some planned time for your body to rest and recuperate.
Yep.